The Museum of Contemporary Art Denver presents The Museum of Contemporary Art Denver presents Practicing Citizenship, a conversation series featuring artists, activists, and experts exploring civic engagement. Tonight, we bring you a post-election conversation with warm cookies of the revolution. And now, here's Sarah Bai, MCA Denver's Director of Programming.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Bai. I'm the Director of Programming at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver, and this is Practicing Citizenship, a program series MCA Denver produces in conjunction with the exhibition Citizenship, a Practice of Society, which is on view now at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver. And we come to you live every Wednesday night throughout the run of the exhibition. Tonight we present What's Next, a post-election conversation with Warm Cookies of the Revolution. And I'm joined tonight by Evan Weissman of Warm Cookies of the Revolution, who has invited Amani Sawari, Dr. Frank Leon Roberts, and Judith LeBlanc for a conversation about what responsibilities we have as citizens, regardless of who sits in the White House. As Evan, Amani, Judith, Frank, and I got together to talk about how this conversation would proceed, we had no idea what the results of the election would be. And tonight at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, Wednesday, November 5th, we are still unclear of what the results of the election might be. But we do know that we live in a divided nation, and maybe it's more clear now than ever. Last night, our state, Colorado, tallied almost 3 million votes for president, which is 200,000 more voters than came out in 2016. But of course, civic engagement begins with voting. It doesn't end there. So to lead this conversation, we are joined tonight by Evan, who's the founding director of Warm Cookies of the Revolution, which is a civic health club that blends innovative arts and culture with crucial civic issues, as well as Amani Sawari, who's a writer and a founder of the site Sawari Media. She was selected as the Jailhouse Lawyers Speaks spokesperson for the 2018 National Prison Strike. We're also joined by Frank Leon Roberts, who's an educator and a political organizer on the front lines of the contemporary movement for Black Lives. He's the founder of the Black Lives Matter syllabus, as well as Judith LeBlanc. Judith is a citizen of the Caddo tribe of Oklahoma and the director of the Native Organizers Alliance, a national Native training and organizing network. And we at MCA are honored to present this conversation. We are glad that you are tuning in, and we invite you to be a part of this discussion. However, it takes you a lot to bring you this programming. And if you have the means, please consider donating to support MCA Denver. We suggest a donation of $10, which is what we would normally charge for tickets. But of course, any amount helps, and we thank you for your support. As you watch tonight, you can type your questions in the comment box at the bottom of the screen. But if you want to comment, you'll need to log in before you can. So click on the Say Something box, which is at the bottom of the live chat area to get started. If you're watching this from a TV, commenting is complicated, so you're better off doing it from a computer or a tablet or a phone. And as questions come up throughout the talk, you can type them in the chat. You can save them from the end. As always, we want to hear your voice, and we want to make this community a welcome space for conversations. So we ask you to be respectful in the comments. So now I am so pleased to bring you a post-election conversation.
Well, hello to all you faceless people out there. I'm gonna assume that there's a stadium full of you that we're talking to, that have your masks on. Actually, I'm gonna just assume your masks are off, and that you're cheering for us, like LeBron just swatted that shot in the finals. So, hi, it's amazing to be speaking with everyone here. I encourage all of you, by the way, to Google the other people up here and read their full bios and the amazing things that they do. But we are here tonight to talk about what's next. Where do we go from here? A bunch of people that I spoke with said that this must be a hard thing to prepare for because we're not going to know the outcome today. And I actually said that not really. Now, the outcome of this election certainly matters in very deep and in practical ways. However, for people who are fighting for our hopeful future, the outcome changes in a tactical way, but not necessarily grand strategy. I think that, for those of us, people who are working for change, there's a recognition that we're always pushing a rock up a hill. And while the status quo just kind of lets it roll down the hill. And so that incline can be steeper or more level, for sure. So elections do matter, but the push is the push. So, and I'd say the second thing of why this is important and wasn't that hard to prepare for is that I'm here in Denver, Colorado. I looked back, and in 2016, out of all the precincts in the city of Denver, there was one that voted for Trump. That was a majority for Trump, a teeny precinct. So we don't live currently in a Democratic or Republican divide. However, we've had some of the worst displacement, some of the biggest disparities of housing prices, and the overall social determinants of health disparities in the country. So, we love the environment here in Denver. We celebrate gay marriage here in Denver, but there is also an almost unquestioned obedience to economic development, which goes hand in hand with racist and militaristic policies. So the presidential election matters, but we also can have a robust conversation if we don't know the actual outcome yet. And we have some hints. So let's go. Let's start. As a way of introducing folks to the people on the panel, I'm going to ask everyone to tell about your home. Tell a story about your home so that people can learn. So here's an example. This is my example. I am actually not in my home right now. I'm at my neighbor's, because if I were at home, there'd be two small children smashing themselves to get in here. They would be butting in. So I thank my wife for being with kids, and I thank my neighbors for letting me be here in this peace and tranquility. My name is Evan Weissman. I run Warm Cookies of the Revolution, which is a civic health club. So we focus on engaging regular people to vote every day locally and with joy and creativity. So next up, we'll start with Judith. Thanks, Judith.
Well, good evening. I'm really honored to be with all of you in this circle. My name is Judith LeBlanc, and I am a citizen of the Caddo Nation. I have dual citizenship. All Indian people, we are citizens of our nations, and we are citizens of the United States, which is a very interesting perspective, because in many, many ways, Native peoples, we're the only peoples in this country who have had a collectively owned land base that has been self-governed since the beginning of time. So we have a lot of experience, good, bad, and ugly, of self-governance. And so I've been to a few rodeos, a few elections, cliffhangers, and not. But I think that this election is going to shape a lot of what my home becomes. In 1973, became involved in the American Indian movement. I left college, never went back, and have continued to work on behalf of tribal sovereignty, on behalf of voting rights, health, education. And so I work in a network of natives like myself, some of whom are like me, walk with a high heel on one foot and a moccasin on the other, but who are deeply concerned and involved in community around issues such as food sovereignty, language preservation, healthcare, housing. And as Sarah said, sometimes people's first civic engagement is voting. Well, we found in our work on this election that many Indians, some as old as 90 years old, voted for the first time because they saw the clear and present danger and the fact that they had to make their voice heard. So my home is changing a little bit, because now we are pledging ourselves to help organize civic engagement for 365 days a year, nothing less.
Lovely. Amani.
Hey you all, my name is Amani Sawari, and I appreciate you all for inviting me into this space, and I'm very happy to be here. The space that I'm physically in right now is River Rouge, Michigan, which is a suburban city right outside of Detroit, Michigan. It's got the water on one side, and it's got a whole bunch of manufacturing plants on the other. I chose to live here because I was able to buy my first home in this area. So I'm really excited and grateful to be a homeowner now at the age of 25. So that's a little story about me just coming back home to Michigan. I was living in Washington State prior to last year, moved back home, got my first home, and now I am doing the same organizing work that I was doing in Washington in a space geographically that is closer to the people that actually inspired me to do this work, which are family members behind the wall, incarcerated loved ones in Michigan state prisons scattered across the state. Michigan has 42 prisons all over the state. And so it is intense work to be so geographically close. And then at the same time, completely restricted from being able to go in. I was only able to go into the prisons for maybe 9 months before everything locked down, and the restrictions on visitation for family and friends of incarcerated loved ones are indefinite at this time. So I just wanted to bring that into the space. And again, I appreciate you all for having me here. Thank you.
Last but not least, the rebel, Frank.
Well, it is such a pleasure and an honor to be with you all today. They say it takes a village, and when they use that phrase, they weren't just talking about raising children. They're talking about what it takes to put together a good speaker series. So thank you to all the villagers who have put together this speaker series, Brother Evan Weissman, Sister Sarah Bile, Warm Cookies of the Revolution, the Museum of Contemporary Art, Denver. It's such an honor to be in this space with you. My name is Frank Leon Roberts. I'm from Hollis, Queens. So I guess the best way to answer that question is to reflect on my geographical home, but also my national home, the home that we're in right now, the United States. Geographically, I'm from Hollis, Queens. If anyone knows about the geography of Queens, New York, back in the 80s, there were two neighborhoods in Queens that were side by side. One of them was Jamaica, Queens. Two solidly middle-class neighborhoods. Jamaica, Queens, which is the neighborhood that gave birth to Donald Trump, which is actually where Donald Trump is from and where he was born and raised. And then on the other side of town, literally on the other side of the railroad tracks, is Hollis, Queens, which was the kind of black middle-class answer to Jamaica, Queens. So Jamaica produced Donald Trump, Hollis produced Run DMC, Russell Simmons, LL Cool J. And that's where I'm from. And something happened. So my early roots was a very kind of Cosby-esque, Huxtable type of family in Hollis, Queens. And then something happened to Hollis, Queens in the 1980s. Two, what I call the twin epidemics, happened to Hollis, Queens. And those epidemics were the crack cocaine epidemic and the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And it ravished Hollis, Queens, and it ravished my family. And so by the time I was, 9 years old, I had a father who, let me back up. There also were, all of a sudden in the 80s, drugs were everywhere. I mean, drugs suddenly were everywhere in Hollis, Queens, and people were experimenting with them the same way people experiment with cigarettes and alcohol today. And so before you knew it, I had a father who was a drug dealer and a mother who was a drug user, a father who was selling crack and a mother who was using crack. And both of them died early on, before the age of 40. And that's the story of my home, Hollis, Queens. But what Hollis, Queens taught me, and what the story of my parents taught me, really was, first of all, it taught me early on that people are so much more beautiful and complicated than the labels, the stigmatizing labels that we attach to them, right? So having a father who was a dope dealer and a mother who was a crackhead, those labels were so stigmatizing. And I knew that these people were so much more than that. So it taught me that, and it really helped shape my political consciousness. I've spent really my entire life standing in solidarity with the people who have been left behind, the people who have been stigmatized, the people who have been demoralized and degraded. So that's the story of my geographical home. Story of my national home, man. I mean, we're in the United States. I'm an African American. I just got back from a 17-hour shift as a poll worker yesterday. And I don't know where people were for election day, but I have to be honest, in New York City, election day felt like a funeral. It felt like a funeral when we got out of there, when we saw those first results coming in, because we were expecting a different narrative. But there was one good thing that came out of election day yesterday, when 65 million Americans voted for a reality TV star once again as their next commander in chief. There was one good thing that came out of that. And here it is. My home, America, once again told the truth. America told the truth. It told the truth about the way it feels about women. It told the truth about the way it feels about Muslims. It told the truth about the way it feels about gay folk. America told the truth. It told the truth about the way it feels about immigrants' rights, the way it feels about women's rights, the way it feels about the movement for Black lives. And so now that America has told the truth, what are we going to do about it? That's what I'm looking forward to talking about tonight.
Lovely, lovely. All right. Well, if we're going to talk about where we're going, we need to know where we've been. So we're going to start with Amani. Where have we been from your experience and your analysis in whatever realm you want to focus on? What brought us to where we are right now today?
So my realm as a human rights advocate is in the prison resistance movement. So the vast majority of my work focuses on serving people who are currently incarcerated citizens, and trying to help people, groups, organizations think about ways to involve incarcerated citizens in the vast movement. My belief is that when we raise the bar for how we treat people in prison, we raise the bar for the treatment of every single human being in our country. So in thinking about where we have been, my lens looks at the fact that our country has been stuck in this cycle of exploiting marginalized people. It's what we're great at as a nation, beginning with indentured servitude, where people had to earn their citizenship through their labor, and then transitioning into chattel slavery, where people were completely unable to earn anything: citizenship, wealth, property, land, even secure social relationships, just based upon their race, their assigned race. And then moving that into convict leasing, that evolved into something that we were more comfortable with. Now we were able to assign certain folks that we deemed unworthy due to some behavior that they did, whether it was loitering or whatever. Usually those behaviors, we know them as the Jim Crow laws. Once someone was loitering on the street, if they were out too late at night, they could be assigned this convict label and then cast into pretty much the same elements of what chattel slavery was: forced to work for nothing for years and years and years. And now we're currently have evolved that into this new phase of mass incarceration, which a lot of us are very comfortable with, knowing that there are people who have been assigned to live and work in cages in slave-like conditions due to some particular activity that they were caught doing. Whether that was a poverty crime, whether it was something that they did because they were defending themselves, whatever it is, they were assigned this label: convict, criminal, and now it doesn't really matter how they're treated in the eyes of our state, in the eyes of our government, when they are cast away behind the wall. They're not given access to open, free communications. Prisoners are the only people who have to pay for emails. No one has to pay to send an email, things like that. They're not able to earn a living wage, minimum wage. They're not even able to pick their diet, what they're able to eat, whether it's because they want to eat something kosher for religious concerns, vegetarian for their own dietary restrictions, things like that. So we've seen this pattern of assigning people this slave status, this marginalized group being assigned to living a life of exploitation, their labor being used to build up the wealth of the dominant class. And our country, our society is stuck in that pattern because that is how we've become this, in my opinion, economic world power. And now we live in a country that's addicted to that, having this population of people. And that's what I've seen where we have been through my lens as an abolitionist and a prisoner human rights advocate.
Frank, thank you, Amani. I should say thank you after each of you, but I'll forget. Thank you during all of this. And now moving on. Frank, where have we been? Where have we been?
Where have we been? Wow. Well, I mean, one of the things we know about how white supremacy sustains itself for the long run is that there's usually a period of progress in America followed by a swift and virulent backlash. This is not a new story. It began in the 19th century. You had all of the progress that came out of the Civil War, which included the Emancipation Proclamation, the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the so-called Freedom Amendments, the rebuilding of the American South, the first Black senators. All of that happened in the context of that early period. It was followed up by what? Post-Reconstruction, right? The birth of the Ku Klux Klan, the dawn of Jim Crow, the next 100 years of state-sanctioned lynching, the birth of the American apartheid system. That was backlash number one. Fast forward to the middle of the 20th century where we had all those freedom fighters, Fannie Lou, Malcolm, Martin, Audrey, all fighting all that progress that came out of the civil rights movement. We had the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 65, the Fair Housing Act of 68, Brown versus Board of Education 55, Civil Rights Act of 64. All this progress in American life followed up by what? The age of Nixon, the birth of the Southern Strategy and the new Republican Party, the birth of mass incarceration, the war on drugs, which was, of course, really just the war on Black people, because if they wanted a war on drugs, they could have started at some of the places I've taught at. They could have started at NYU. They could have started at Columbia University. They would have found plenty for the war on drugs. But where did they start? They started in Hollis, Queens. They started in Oakland, California. So we know that the war on drugs was really a war on Black people. What am I getting at? We are essentially living in a third Reconstruction, brothers and sisters. That's how we got here. That, above all, the age of Trump is a repudiation of all of the cultural gains that we saw happening really in the age of Obama, which was, problematic for a whole host of other reasons. But we know that the age of Obama was also the birth of the movement for Black Lives Matter. And now we are living in the backlash to that. And so that's how we got here. We got here because white supremacy, as virulent and disgusting as it is predictable and consistent. And here we are again, living in the third Reconstruction.
Yeah, word. Judith, where have we been?
So don't tempt me, Evan, to start 500 years ago. I'm not going to start with Plymouth Rock. You can't make me do that. But I will say that because so much of our collective history has already been spoken about, that we got here through, I think, people in this last 9 months seeing how hope and pain can be woven very closely together. And that hope and the pain can either lead to empathy, reciprocity, and building community, or it can make people fearful. I think when you look at the statistic, 10% of the US population marched in the streets after the murder of George Floyd. 10%, the largest number, very multiracial, of people of a movement spontaneously responding in ways we've never seen before at a time of pandemic. So in a time of pandemic, when our people are dying at higher rates, where the health system is in failure, you had this incredible surge of empathy and an incredible reckoning with systemic racism. that it began in the very beginning and has continued through periods of history, and that at this moment it needed to be challenged. So you saw all kinds of statues of Confederate statues and Columbus statues being brought down because people felt frustrated about the dominant narrative. They want the truth. They want the truth to be seen for all. I say that to say that it's been a time where those of us who are organizers, we felt this magic movement moment. Our hearts, even though with all the suffering, the pain that people are going through, our hearts were very, very strong. And those of us went to the front, and we've been organizing. For example, in many communities, Black, Latino, and especially on our land base, our tribal land base, you had people going back to traditional practices. In Ilhongtawan, the Yankton Sioux tribe in South Dakota, 100 families got together, rented a tiller, and created gardens for their families because they knew they couldn't drive into the cities because of the pandemic. They knew there wasn't going to be fresh food of any sort that would be available. They'd have to live off of canned goods. And so I think we saw that in many communities where people went back to basics of community building. But we got here to tonight, where you have nearly half of the people voting against Trump. We've gotten here because people understand the threat to democracy that was upon us. And although we still have half of the population who, out of fear and ignorance in some ways, and arrogance in others, and due to the dominant narrative of racist ideology, voted against their own self-interest and voted for Trump. But what I'm hopeful about is that we got here because justice is on the move. Because in Indian country, we saw the highest rates of voter engagement in history. We got here because more than half of the people, a slim majority, are moving in our direction. And so Indian people, Black, Latino, progressive white people need to stand up and lead. Strong hats to the front.
Right. Well, thank you all. Well, it's I think now we get to the meat. Sorry for the sorry for that sort of imagery. It's violent meat-eating imagery. But the meat, I'll just say it again, of why we're here is now. So what is to be done? What do we do? What's next? And so I wonder, and Frank, this will be for you. What is it that residents? I don't use citizen too much, but that's what it means. But I don't care about your documentation status. But what is it that residents and citizens can be doing right now or very soon to influence the future?
Well, my responses really are spiritual responses, because I do believe social justice organizing is a spiritual endeavor, right? And so the first thing we've got to do is learn how to tell the truth again. Imagine that, how radical. Tell the truth. James Baldwin once said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. A lot of talk right now about healing, but we can't have healing without honesty. We can't have trust without truth. And the truth of the matter is Donald Trump is a white nationalist, anti-immigrant, xenophobic, homophobic, white supremacist. And if you voted for that, you were an accomplice in that project. And you need to just sit with that. And we need to tell ourselves the truth about that without being afraid of backlash. So number one, let's start to tell ourselves the truth again, right? Number two, we've got to stop confusing the symptoms of the disease with the disease itself. A doctor cannot heal a disease until she has first diagnosed it. Donald Trump, Trumpism is not the disease. It is a symptom of the disease. I don't know if I have any old school Black church folk listening, and forgive me, sometimes you got to use religious metaphors just for their pedagogical value. But one of my favorite scriptures in that Black Christian tradition comes from the book of Ephesians 6:12. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against what? Powers and principalities. The principality of male chauvinism, the principality of anti-Blackness, the principality of corporate greed, the principality of virulent and xenophobia. Our struggle is not against Donald Trump or Lindsey Graham or the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or any particular man or entity. Our struggle is against the underlying powers and principalities that give them rise. So to me, I would start there. Learn how to tell the truth again in this age of alternative facts. Number two, stop confusing the symptoms of the disease. I'm not interested in resisting Donald Trump. Donald Trump is too small. I'm interested in resisting and abolishing the epidemic of white male heteropatriarchy. Let's be clear. This is about powers and principalities.
Or Judith, do you want to yell at Frank and take issue with everything that he just said right there? Go ahead, go for it.
I would never do such a thing to my brother from Queens. I live in unceded Lenape territory, which is AKA Harlem. So I would never cross someone from Queens. But I will say that, what we got to do, we got to stay engaged. The traditional civic engagement practice is that funders pour money into communities, especially people of color, Black, Latino, Indian communities, a few weeks before the election. They want us to rush our people into the polls, get them to vote, and then they close up shop and they lay everybody off who they paid to help to organize these campaigns. We need 365 days a year of civic engagement. That means that what we need to do is to seriously reflect on why is it that a higher percentage of people of color voted for Trump this time than the last. Small numbers, but nevertheless. Why did that happen? Why is it that we had a very high turnout rate in Indian country, and yet CNN and all of the reporters keep lumping Indians, who were a swing vote in 7 states, Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina. We had more people on the ground than the margin of victory that's showing right now. But why is it that the media is not covering the power that we're building in Indian country? Because of systemic racism, because it is a system, it is a structure. But we have to look seriously at what's our role in changing the system. And frankly, we've not done enough. And I say this as an elder coming from the American Indian movement generation of the 70s, when some of y'all weren't born and the rest of you may have been in your Spider-Man pajamas. We have not nurtured and deepened and supported critical thinking. We have many people who do not believe in science, or else they wouldn't smoke cigarettes or they would wear their masks. We have to encourage critical thinking, and we have to deepen the values that are connected to human life and understanding our relationship to community, understanding in a traditional indigenous way that we are all in relationship. Because right now, we are in a movement moment. We feel the power. We've been in the streets. We took that protest into the ballot box. And that's why there's a larger number of people who've ever voted in US history. But the truth is, we don't need movement moments. We need movements. We need to take this moment and organize it. And that takes love of our people, which is discipline, accountability, critical thinking, and really thinking about the values which lead our work. We pursue a spiritually directed strategy in Indian country. We rely upon the history of our traditional practices, our ancestral knowledge, and we dream about our descendants. That's our guide. That's how we develop our strategy. And I think that's the kind of medicine that's needed in every community if we're going to lead in a moment of such division.
You got no argument from me. I run a civic health club, and I think that the need for our civic culture needs recommitting everywhere across this country to civic education and civic action. And if that means using a different word, depending on where you are, then use a different word. But that general idea needs strengthening for sure. Amani, can you close us out on what? Actually, I'm going to close us out on this after you. I got some things to say about this, but where you go next? What should residents and citizens be doing right now, or in the near term to influence the future in whatever realm you want?
So I want to speak to this as an abolitionist. I do believe in a world without prisons, and I know that can be difficult for some people to digest, comprehend, or envision. But when thinking about abolition, I think about the elimination of the dependence of cages as a form of punishment for human beings. We do not, as a developed nation, need to confine people to 8x8 spaces in order to try to make adjustments in their behavior or in their thinking. We already know that it doesn't work. And we have two candidates that are in the lead right now who have both indicated some form of commitment to decarcerating the United States. And that is unheard of for a candidate at this stage in the race to be on top of it saying, hey, this is something I'm interested in doing. For a really long time, it's something that no one even wanted to speak of. It was such a dividing and controversial topic. And now at this point, and I think due to the conditions of the health crisis behind the wall, which a lot of people have forgotten how many people have died behind the wall. In Michigan alone, there have been over 3,000 people who have been infected by the coronavirus behind the wall, and there have been over 72 deaths. And the coronavirus itself has reached almost every single institution, over 30 of the 40 plus prisons that are in our state. And we can see even higher numbers and even more critical cases and conditions in more overpopulated states like New York and California, where people are much closer together on the inside. So people are starting to realize that prison doesn't work. And for as long as there's a pandemic behind the wall, there's a pandemic in the United States, because there's always going to be guards, prison officials, staff going in and out and bringing those illnesses in and out of the system. And so we really need to think about a way that we can adjust and really transform our system, push people beyond the reformist thinking. You cannot reform hell. You have to completely transform it and build it again from the ground up. And I think that we can begin to do that over these next 4 years, regardless of which candidate is in the office, because they have both indicated some sort of, my cat has just jumped up here, some sort of intention of turning back the dial when it comes to how many people we're locking up. And I also want to point out that Joe Biden is responsible for the 94 crime bill that really led to this exponential rise in the number of people that were behind the wall. We had less than 100,000 people incarcerated federally prior to the passing of the 94 crime bill. And just a few years later, we had over 1.5 million people in prison. And so we really need to think about what we need to do when we're thinking about the policies that we're pushing and the language that we're using when we're talking about how we can decrease the number of people in prison. And so I think that is something that we can do over these next 4 years. And how we can do that, we need to make sure that we're looking into those dark spaces and exposing what's happening behind the wall. People in prison don't have cameras. They can't take pictures. And when they do, and something gets out, even if it's just a picture of how the bathroom looks, everyone is amazed. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it looks like that. Well, we can't believe it because we never see it. When we're finally exposed to it, then someone has to take responsibility for those conditions. And so that depends on us being connected to people in prison and working with people on the inside. And so particularly what we do at Sawari Media is create media that helps people understand what's going on behind the wall, publishing stories by people that are incarcerated, sharing their artwork, sharing their poetry, making sure that people are exposed to those voices and amplifying what's going on, particularly in our 30 states of focus. But we want to expand to all the states. And so I really encourage people to connect with someone on the inside. If you've got a family member or a friend on the inside, reach back out to them. Now is the time. And if you don't, look at groups and organizations that are doing that type of work so that you can be a part of that movement to abolish and really transform the system that we have depended on for so long that's due for a dramatic change.
Yeah, thank you, Amani. And when you talk about having vision of dreaming of something different, I think that's not only expected and necessary, but that also specifically for what you're talking about includes, decarcerating, but also the changing who goes to prison and why they go to prison, and some of those things even before dealing with once they're there, and then how to change that system. But yeah, it's. I was going to add. I'm going to say one thing, which is if any of you are watching, I can't see what's on there, but if you have questions in about 10 minutes, we can get to your questions. So put them in the chat if you're there. I had a few thoughts on this. One is actually echoing what you said, is having vision, the vision to dream a little bit about what we need and what we want. We won't get there unless we do that. The second thing is something that we've been seeing recently with the current uprising and the movement for Black lives, and as it relates to COVID, is not being afraid of power, using power. And I think for a lot of people, that is a scary idea. I'm talking about regular people, not people who are already organizing, but to understand that power is we have to harness it, we have to use it, not be afraid of it. The third thing is I do think we need to rethink direct action. I think we have a lot of beautiful expressions of frustration and of what we want, and of saying, hey, this is what we want and this is what we don't want. But I think we also need to continually reinvent what that is. And the last thing is what I mentioned before, which is what Judith was talking about. Civic culture needs recommitting. But the last thing that I wanted to say is I think that we don't need to reinvent the wheel as we talk about policies that we want to push for. Locally, they might change a little bit, but we're in the midst of the largest and most widespread social movement this country's ever had. And the movement for Black Lives put out policy platforms in 2016. They've been updating it this past year. But that, if you haven't looked at it, Google it, it's an incredible blueprint. It's an incredible document. And just to mention a few of them that are on here. So they're broken down in different sections of reparations, of investing and divesting, of economic justice, of community control, and of political power. And just some of the things that are there are high quality free higher education, student loan forgiveness, a livable wage, access and control of food sources and housing and land. That's just under reparations. In investment and divesting, universal health care, cutting the military expenditures and reallocating for domestic infrastructure and community well-being, decriminalizing and expunging drug-related offenses. Under economic justice, restructuring the tax code, a jobs program, a right to restored land, clean air, and water and housing. End the TPP and renegotiate all trade agreements to prioritize workers and community interests. Support cooperative economic networks. There's more and more. Under community control, participatory budgeting. It's something I've been involved with residents here in Denver. Participatory budgeting at the local, the state, and the federal level. Under political power, there's release of all political prisoners. There is net neutrality, universal and automatic voter registration, voting day holidays. So all of these things, you can just say, oh, I just listed a bunch of dreams. So what do we do to get there? But the point is just start there. We don't need to start coming up with other things. Start with the largest mass movement in this country and what people are calling for there. And then get involved. I say to the people watching, get involved in one of these areas. Pick one. It doesn't matter what. But if you commit yourself to one of these, you will become an expert in the entire world. It's just the way that it works. If you dig in and get involved in one thing, you're going to know it all. So that's my pitch there. The last question is what or who gives you hope right now? And if you can be specific about, are these artists, are these people, are these thinkers, are these movements? But what or who is giving you hope at this moment whether that be for literally tonight or for longer future. But let us know. And I'm not going to call on who's first. We'll see who pops up. Virtually arm wrestle for it.
Me being a Virgo and being so committed to structure and order, I think I'm next in the rolling wheel. So it's right, maybe. So I'm gonna step in quickly before my much more brilliant Orquin sisters jump in. I mean, Black people give me hope, and quite frankly, I think that Black people, Black and brown people, have always been the hope of America, and have always been what America has to depend on for the future, right? And so I have tremendous hope for the movement for Black Lives. Thank you so much, Evan, for invoicing the policy platform of 2016, which has also been updated in 2020, as well as the Breathe Act, which I want to encourage folks to go take a look at it, authored by the Movement for Black Lives. But I want to say something really quickly. I want us to remember that our struggle is something that Martin Luther King actually said once, right? And I hate using Dr. King because he's been so appropriated by white liberals. But sometimes you got to go back to Dr. King. And, he told us that our struggle is qualitative, not quantitative. Our struggle is qualitative, not quantitative. What did he mean by that? There are more people in this country who love rather than who hate. I honestly believe that. There are more people like us, the four of us, than there are everyone else, right? So our struggle is not, our dilemma, our crisis is not quantitative. There are more of us than there are of them. The problem is the people who hate know how to do so with conviction. And so part of what this moment requires is for us to learn how to love with conviction. That is what Dr. King meant when he referred to the strength to love. And I'm hopeful that people are starting to realize that actually we are the moral majority. The problem is we don't have the same moral conviction as the haters. The haters are willing to shut down the government, to steal the election, to put people in cages, to do whatever it takes. And so even though their behavior is so unethical, you almost got to give them credit for the moral conviction. And part of what I think it means for those of us who consider ourselves to be progressives is what are we willing to fight for? And I'm hopeful, to answer the questions more succinctly, I'm hopeful that people are starting to see that we actually are not in the minority, that we've got to understand that our struggle is qualitative, not quantitative. I'm hopeful about that.
Lovely.
I just want to say, Dr. Frank Leon Roberts, aho. That's what Indians say. It's like an amen, aho. It's not so really so much what we do. We have to stay engaged, but how we do it is as important as what we do. You are so right. And what gives me hope right now is that I think there's a growing grassroots awareness based on the work that we have done in 9 states with over 80 moccasins on the ground in the swing states. There's a growing realization that elections don't solve problems. Communities solve problems. Organized communities solve problems. And that's what gives me hope, because elections are one tool in the social change toolbox. Sometimes we have prayer circles. Sometimes we do narrative work. Sometimes we protest in the streets. Sometimes we organize takeovers. But sometimes we vote because it gives a snapshot of the power at the grassroots. It's not the total story, it's a snapshot. And the elections give us a new conditions under which to organize. Because I'll tell you, what gives me hope is that I believe that a spiritually directed strategy and relying on our values, as Frank was saying, will lead us to be able to play the kind of role we need to. Because you know what? Protesting is easy. You want to throw down, stand off with police, that takes bravery, but that is so much easier in some ways than trying to figure out how do we raise, not from anger, but from actual power, the need for fundamental transformational change. It gives me hope that people are thinking about that. People are talking about that. We've never had that kind of conversation after any election. I've been to quite a few of those rodeos. So That gives me hope. People are thinking strategically and leading with values.
Wonderful.
I agree
Amani?
with Judith. Like, looking at the people that I work with personally behind the wall, who are the critical thinkers, who are pouring wisdom out in the articles that they're writing, who are just sharing their experiences with so much vulnerability and conviction, as Frank mentioned, in their writings, in their poetry, in their artwork. That gives me a ton of hope. And just to shout out some people, for example, Lasino Hamilton, who was incarcerated and was innocent of the crime, found innocent 26 years later. He's now free. He's written, he's been on Truth Out. He's been in different magazines, articles, journals, with his writings that he'd been writing over the past decades that he was behind the wall. Now he's finally been freed. He just got his first apartment yesterday, and he's living an amazing life. Now, another person, Malik Washington, also known as Comrade Malik, he was incarcerated for 20 plus years. And now he's the assistant editor to the national Black newspaper, the San Francisco Bay View. Both of them have been out for less than a month. And also, a lot of you may be more familiar with Jalil Muntaqim. He's now freed, and he was incarcerated for 50 plus years, a very famous political prisoner. So looking at the lives and the work of people on the inside who continued to push, who did not allow the conditions around them to completely suppress their passion, their conviction, their energy, and they made it to the other side. I still have brothers who are behind the wall, who feel in their bones that they will not die there. That's what gives me hope to continue to push. And anyone who can live in those conditions, in the belly of this beast that we call America, I know that I can do it too.
Yep. Oh man, the wisdom coming out of here is it's like a lovely soup that's just filling me up right now.
I think Evan is hungry. All these food metaphors, there was meat, there's soup now. Not enough vegan references, but
yeah,
the soup could be vegan. Okay.
It's dinner time. So we do have a couple questions. Right before that, I'll just say for me, you know, the artists, the poets, the musicians, the dancers, these are the folks that everyone wants them around. Every time there's a gathering, they are the heart of what's going on. So what gives me hope is the truth telling and the joy that comes from creating, from finding obstacles and finding creative ways out of obstacles. And that's what we need. So that's number one. And number two is very, very practical, which is I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Biden is going to win. And I'll say that the two presidents who brought us the most important progressive legislation from the 20th century, so FDR and Johnson, they both faced intense pressure right after they were elected by movements, by people. Roosevelt inherited the Great Depression, and he helped corporations recover first. And there were a couple social programs, but because there were massive strikes, because there was the threat of the Labor Party, then that's why he was pushed to do Social Security and the WPA and the New Deal. Johnson's administration he was a centrist. And, he fought against the Truman's Civil Rights Bill in whatever that was, 54. But after Kennedy's assassination and with the Civil Rights Movement going, he was pushed very hard. And I think that gives me a lot of hope, is that Joe Biden, if he wins here, is not going to win because people are inspired by Joe Biden. He's going to win because he wasn't Donald Trump. And the hope is that he is someone that can be pushed and pushed and pushed, and that perhaps we could get the next progressive administration. That does give me hope, because I think we do have the energy and we do have the know-how for it. Okay, so I'll say this. I'll say thanks to everyone, but we're staying on. We have a few more minutes left. We have two questions that I want to highlight right now. And so I'll say them both, and people can answer whichever one they want. The first one is no matter who wins the presidential election, we are a divided nation. What practical way can we influence our Republican neighbors? And the second question is, what do you think about the future of monuments? Monuments that need to be removed, monuments that need to be reframed, or new monuments, memorials, storytelling spaces that need to be established? So those are the two questions. If anyone wants to take. And we're going to mess with Frank's Virgo-ness. This one is truly popcorn. Whoever wants to go, in whatever order.
So I have Republican neighbors right across the street. They have their, Trump Pence signs lined up across their lawn. And I newly moved in, and I did think about putting some Black Lives Matter signs in my yard. But I think what was more impactful was having a one-on-one conversation with them about who I was, why I was moving to the area, and what inspired me. And it gave us a foundation that had absolutely nothing to do with the election. I didn't ask them what they were voting. It was obvious. They didn't ask me what I was voting. We didn't have any sort of political discussions, but we did just share space around what the community looked like, how the neighborhood has changed, how my home had been formally condemned, and they hoped that it wouldn't get turned down because it would bring down their property value, what we cared about in our community, the vagrants we would see, the alley walkers, them introducing me to what went on, and their passion of just sharing that with me so that we could unite in making this neighborhood better. So aside from talking about Trump, Pence, Harris, Biden, we talked about what we both care about because we both own homes in this neighborhood and we don't want to see any more torn down. We want to see the robustness of the area come back in this community. And I think you could completely avoid the political discussions and talk about what you truly care about and want to see change in your vision for the community, because as homeowners, as renters, as people who live there and who depend on this place thriving in order to thrive as individuals or as people who are raising families, there are things that you do care about, that you share, and you can just build on that. And 10 years down the line, there will be a different president that maybe we'll both want to vote for because we've been building around those policies and those interests as a foundation first, before they knew me, who I was, politically, what my mindset was. They didn't see this Black Panther shirt. They saw this face, and we just had a simple conversation around what our neighborhood looked like. I think you could start there.
I so agree with you, because so much of what the dominant narrative is, reinforces this idea of individualism, that might makes right, that if someone messes with you, you mess with them back. And I know what that's about, because when I was young, I was active in the 1970s. In the 1970s, to be angry, to be hostile, to tell someone to crack off if you didn't agree with them, that was seen as militant. And I spent a lot of years organizing on that basis. Like, you don't agree with me? Get out of my way. I'm going forward. We're in a moment of such crisis and such devastation and interruption of our cultures, of our society, of our communities because of the COVID pandemic, that we have to organize from a position of love. Now, love is not about being full of hugs and cheery. Love is about discipline and accountability. That's what love is. Love is about actually trying to figure out where are the places that we meet. And Amani nailed it. Because elections and who you vote for, it may be a personal decision, but it's a political act. Once the elections are over, we have to, again, stand in our power, our values, and begin to reach out to those unlikely allies to see what happens next week, for example, when they try to gut the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. Where's the point that we meet on that issue? Because the majority of people in this country majority of the people in this country support the Affordable Care Act, Republicans and Democrats. How do we organize that? How do we build a movement where people may have voted for Trump, but they don't agree with the gutting of the ACA? So that's the challenge. That's the challenge. Where do we find that ground to stand on, and where do we give leadership? Because our moral, inherent direction is to build community.
Yeah, I am so much more problematic than my dear sisters. And I say problematic in a bad way, not the good way, because I really aspire to the aspirational models that my sisters Judith and Amani present. I do see things a little bit differently. And I think that the question itself, as it was posed, for me, reflects the problem of progressives. And I say that with all due respect, but Republicans and conservatives don't have the same questions that we ask. So that question itself is which I love, right? Is a question that a liberal would only ask, right? Because liberals, how we got Joe Biden was in part about how can we speak to the Republicans and be nice to them and get them to come over to the other side. And did it happen? We don't know. If Biden got the White House, it will be by razor thin. But all that talk of the coalition that was supposed to come out in Texas didn't happen. The coalition that was supposed to come out in Georgia didn't happen. The coalition that supposed to come out of North Carolina didn't happen. Here's what I'm saying. For me, I come from a place of stop talking to people who are committed to misunderstanding you, right? Which another way of saying that is, the question was, what practical way can you talk to your Republican neighbor? My response is this: stop apologizing for being a progressive. Stop apologizing for being a liberal, right? And so speak your truth and stop trying to convince people who are committed to misunderstanding you. The Democratic Party is the only party. Progressives are the only constituency in America that is more concerned with what the other side is doing than what we're doing. So to me, the practical response is to actually focus on organizing ourselves rather than asking, what is the practical way for me to speak to my Republican neighbor? The question is, what is the practical way to speak to my progressive neighbor who there's a coalition to be had? How can I speak to my Muslim brothers and sisters even if I'm not Muslim? How can I speak to my queer brothers and sisters even if I am not queer? How can I speak to my Native brothers and sisters even if I am not Native? How can I stand in solidarity with women even though I'm not a woman? To me, that is the strategy, not investing so much time and energy talking to people who are very often committed to misunderstanding us, and instead building coalitions. If the president and his peons want to spend their time in office building walls, we can spend our time building bridges. And so the way you build bridges is actually, let's start building a coalition of all those progressives out there who need to stop apologizing for being a progressive.
Well, I'll tell you what, it is just a beautiful, lovely thing to hear from you all. Just wonderful. And so I'm going to put my chip with Judith and Love there because I love being with you all this evening and hearing from everyone. And I want to mention to all the viewers out there to definitely check out what these folks are up to. So the Native Organizers Alliance, the Right to Vote and Sawari Media. Check out the Black Lives Matter syllabus and the Baldwin Hansberry Project, plus a bunch of other things that everybody's involved with. And I'll leave you with my hope. This is both a hope and a fear, and it's hopefully motivating and not cynical, is if we can push locally at your state level and nationally and push, we can achieve so much. And if we don't do it right, I believe what will happen next time is a capable version of Trump. So hopefully that will be a motivating, that will be motivating to people. And if not, you can come find me afterwards and we'll have a chitty chat. So Amani, Frank, Judith, thank you. And then to the Museum of Contemporary Art and to Sarah, thank you all so much for having us. We really appreciate it. And thank you to the Roddenberry Foundation who put the four of us together. We love them.
I want to thank you for joining us tonight for this conversation, and thank you, Frank, Amani, Judith, and Evan for bringing us hope. As a reminder, we are here every Wednesday night at 5 p.m. Mountain Time throughout the fall. For a full list of programs, visit our website at mcadenver.org/events. Next week, we present a conversation about conversation, an active listening workshop with Pippi Kessler. This will be an interactive program presented on Zoom. Thank you for tuning in. And thank you to Warm Cookies of the Revolution. Have a great night.